What happens when proving your ability means risking the one person you trust the most? Hello everyone, wishing you a wonderful day. Today, we're going to dive into a powerful story where trust is tested, silence becomes painful, and one bold decision could either save $1 billion project or quietly break a relationship. If you enjoy this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next chapters of this journey. The morning at the construction site begins more quietly than usual. The sky is overcast, a thin layer of clouds stretching endlessly above the cranes and unfinished concrete structures. The sound of machinery hasn't fully woken yet. Only a few engines hum in the distance. For a rare moment, the site feels almost calm. Linda arrives early, as she always does. She stands near the edge of the site, helmet in hand, scanning the plans on her tablet. Her posture is focused, but there's a softness in her expression today. Less guarded, less tense than before. She takes a slow breath, as if allowing herself to believe that today might be easier. Kwang appears a few minutes later. He walks toward her with a cup of coffee in one hand and a folder tucked under his arm. Without saying much, he hands her the coffee. It's exactly how she likes it. No sugar, just a splash of milk. Linda looks up, surprised for a brief second, then smiles. "Thanks," she says quietly. Kwang nods. "Big day. Don't forget to drink it while it's still hot." It's a small gesture, almost insignificant in the middle of $1 billion project, but to Linda, it means more than she lets on. These moments, simple, wordless, are what make her feel grounded. For a second, she forgets the pressure, the expectations, the constant need to prove herself. They walk side by side toward the temporary office. Their steps are in sync, familiar. People around them greet Kwang with respect, nodding quickly before moving on. A few glance at Linda, some curious, some neutral, some harder to read. She notices, as she always does, but today she doesn't let it slow her down. Inside the meeting room, the air feels heavier. Blueprints are spread across the table, and the project leaders are already seated. Kwang takes his place at the head of the table, naturally commanding attention. Linda sits to his right, opening her tablet and preparing her notes. As the meeting begins, Linda listens carefully. The discussion circles around delays, cost adjustments, and safety concerns. When the topic shifts to one of the most critical sections of the project, Linda straightens slightly. "I have a proposal," she says, her voice calm but confident. "If we adjust the structural sequence here, we can save at least 2 weeks without compromising safety." The room quiets. A few heads turn toward her. Linda explains her idea clearly, pointing out calculations, stress points, and alternative materials. She's done her homework. This isn't a rushed suggestion. It's something she's been refining for days. For a moment, she feels that familiar spark. This is where she belongs. This is what she's good at. When she finishes, there's a brief silence. Kwang looks at the plans, then at Linda. His expression is unreadable. "It's an interesting approach," he says slowly. "But we need more verification. This section is too critical to take risks." Linda's smile fades just slightly. She nods, but inside, something tightens. "I've already run multiple simulations," she replies. "The margins are still within—" "I know," Kwang interrupts gently but firmly. "I'm not saying no. I'm saying we double-check. I'll have another team review it." His tone is professional, logical, responsible. But to Linda, it feels distant. She leans back in her chair, hands clasped together, saying nothing more. Around the table, the discussion moves on, but a few people exchange subtle looks. One of the senior engineers clears his throat, as if about to speak, then decides against it. Linda notices everything. The meeting ends without conflict, yet the air feels different when everyone stands up. Conversations break into smaller groups. Linda gathers her things quietly. Kwang is immediately surrounded by project managers asking follow-up questions. She waits. He doesn't look over. Eventually, she steps outside alone. The construction site is louder now. Machines roar to life. Workers move in coordinated patterns, and the day fully begins. Linda walks along the path she's taken hundreds of times before, but today it feels longer. She stops near one of the support pillars, watching workers secure steel beams. Her mind replays the meeting, not the words, but the tone. Kwang didn't dismiss her, yet he didn't stand beside her either. She tells herself not to overthink it. Still, the thought lingers. Does he trust me? Or is he just being careful? Later that morning, a light rain begins to fall. The ground grows slick, and the site supervisors start issuing warnings. Kwang walks by Linda, slowing his pace. "Change your boots," he says quietly. "The ground's getting dangerous." She looks down at her shoes, then back at him. "I'm fine." "I know," he replies. "Still, I'd rather be safe." For a second, their eyes meet. The concern in his gaze is genuine. Linda nods and turns toward the equipment area to switch boots. The warmth returns briefly, but it doesn't erase what came before. By early afternoon, tension creeps back in. A minor issue is reported in the section Linda oversees. Nothing serious, just a discrepancy in measurements that needs clarification. Yet word spreads faster than it should. A few workers whisper. Someone mentions Linda's proposal from the morning. "She's pushing things too fast," one voice mutters. "She's ambitious," another says, not entirely kindly. Linda hears fragments as she walks past. She keeps her head high, her expression neutral, but her chest feels heavy. She knows how this works. One small doubt is all it takes. Kwang is informed almost immediately. He listens, asks questions, and gives instructions to pause the section until everything is reviewed again. His decisions are quick and precise, necessary. But when Linda sees the work stop, something inside her sinks. She approaches him. "It's just a measurement issue," she says. "We can fix it in an hour." "I know," Kwang replies, "but until we're sure, we pause." His eyes flick briefly to the workers nearby, then back to her. The message is clear. This is not the time for personal conversations. Linda nods slowly. "Okay." She steps back, feeling the invisible line between them grow sharper. Around them, the site continues to move, but her world feels strangely still. As the rain falls harder, Linda stands under the temporary shelter, watching Kwang coordinate teams with steady authority. He's doing exactly what a leader should do, yet she can't shake the thought that keeps repeating in her mind. If he doesn't stand with me now, when will he? The question lingers, unanswered, as the afternoon stretches on. The rain doesn't last long, but it leaves the construction site damp and heavy with the smell of wet concrete and metal. By late afternoon, the clouds thin out, allowing pale sunlight to filter through. Work resumes in other sections, yet the area Linda oversees remains paused. The stillness feels louder than the machines. Linda sits inside the temporary office, staring at her laptop screen without really seeing it. Numbers and diagrams blur together. She knows the issue is minor. She knows she can fix it quickly. What unsettles her isn't the problem itself. It's the silence that followed. Outside, Kwang moves from group to group, giving instructions, listening, nodding. His posture is steady, his voice controlled. To everyone else, he looks exactly like a leader in full command. To Linda, he looks farther away than he's been in a long time. She closes her laptop and steps outside. Kwang notices her approach, but doesn't stop talking until he finishes giving directions to a supervisor. When he finally turns to her, his expression softens slightly. "Give me a minute," he says. "I'll come find you." Linda shakes her head. "It's fine. I just wanted to let you know. I've reviewed the measurements again. There's no structural risk." "I trust that," Kwang replies. The word trust hangs between them, fragile. "Then why is everything still on hold?" she asks quietly. Kwang exhales. He glances around, making sure no one is close enough to hear. "Because this isn't just about you or me. If something goes wrong, it affects the entire project." "I know that," Linda says, her voice steady but tight. "But it feels like every time there's pressure, I'm the variable that needs to be controlled." "That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" she asks, finally meeting his eyes. For a moment, Kwang doesn't answer. He rubs his forehead, a sign of stress he rarely shows. "It's about responsibility," he says. "I can't afford mistakes." Linda nods slowly. "Neither can I." They stand there in silence. Workers pass by, boots crunching on gravel. The world doesn't pause for unresolved feelings. Kwang speaks again, more softly. "Let me handle this." Linda hears the words, but what she feels is distance. "Let me handle this" sounds too much like step aside. As evening approaches, most of the team begins packing up. The site quiets once more, shadows stretching long across unfinished structures. Linda stays behind. She reopens her laptop, pulls up the revised calculations, and works through them line by line. This time, she doesn't do it to convince anyone else. She does it for herself. An hour passes, then another. Finally, she saves the file, a refined version of her proposal, cleaner, stronger. She hesitates only briefly before forwarding it directly to the system, updating the technical plan under her authority. It's a risk. She knows that. But doing nothing feels worse. By the time Kwang finishes his rounds and returns to the office, the sky has darkened. He checks his tablet, scanning updates. His brows knit together as he notices the revision. He opens the file. The changes are subtle but significant. Efficient, logical, carefully executed. His first reaction isn't anger, it's concern. He steps outside, looking for Linda. He finds her standing near the edge of the site, helmet tucked under her arm, watching the last workers leave. "You updated the plan," he says. Linda doesn't turn immediately. "Yes." "Without final approval?" "Yes." The honesty in her voice catches him off guard. She faces him now, her expression calm but resolute. "I needed you to see it finished, not just as an idea." Kwang studies her face. He sees fatigue there, and something else. Determination edged with hurt. "You put yourself in a difficult position," he says carefully. "So did you," she replies, "when you chose silence over support." The words land harder than she intended, but she doesn't take them back. Kwang looks away, jaw tightening. "You know why I did that." "I know why you think you did," Linda says, "but it still left me alone." For a long moment, neither of them speaks. The site is almost empty now, lights flickering on one by one. The project looms around them, massive and unfinished, much like the conversation they keep avoiding. "I don't want to stand behind you anymore," Linda continues, her voice low. "I want to stand beside you, or not at all." Kwang finally looks at her. There's conflict in his eyes, the kind that doesn't have a clean solution. "You're asking me to choose," he says. "No," she answers. "I'm asking you to trust." He glances back at the plans on his tablet, then at the silent site, then at her. Leadership has always required sacrifice. He's just never been forced to confront what kind. "I need time," he says. Linda nods. "So do I." She turns and walks toward the exit, leaving Kwang alone with the weight of his decision. As he stands there, the revised plan still glowing on his screen, one thought echoes in his mind. Is this the moment that saves the project? Or the moment that changes everything between us? The answer remains uncertain, hanging in the quiet night air.
cho phiên chợ. Một cây mía đổ bất ngờ khiến cả nhóm kêu, rồi cười xòa vì kịp đỡ nhau. Chiều xuống Linda buồn bã vì con rúi của mình đã biến mất. Nghi có kẻ trộm rình quanh nhà. Chị yêu quàng ghế đến lắng nghe và trấn an và tự sửa chiếc camera cũ trong kho, kéo dây lắp trước sân nhà để bảo vệ cô. Đêm đến, Linda nấu cơm nếp cẩm mời anh ở lại ăn. Hai người trò chuyện lòng ấm lại. Quang kể áp lực công ty, camera nháy sáng, bóng lạ thoáng qua, và không biết Linda có sống sót qua được đêm nay không. Mọi người nếu thấy video hay, hãy cho mình một like, một subscribe. Cảm ơn mọi người nhé.